ESPN's Football Power Index dropped today, and there are several interesting storylines woven within ESPN's Football Power Index rankings. There are, of course, some things that I agree with, disagree with, as I imagine there are some things that you, the viewer, agree with and disagree with. And what makes talking about ESPN's Football Power Index, what makes talking about it so fun is that, one, almost everyone that I see when I still had the Instagram app, or even when you just type in ESPN Football Power Index on Google, everyone's talking about it. It's a pretty widely known thing for people who are willing to go more than knee-deep in the pool that is college football. It's pretty well known. And it's well known for a variety of good reasons. It's well known for a variety of bad reasons. Some of the good reasons are that ESPN's FPI is actually pretty darn good at predicting game outcomes. A reason that it's known in not such a positive light is it has a history of being a little too reliant on certain things and of predictably overrating certain teams or predictably overrating teams that do well on the recruiting trail. But it is a computer algorithm. Of course, the inputs, they have their own biases toward them, as does really any input. Statistics are able to be manipulated, of course. But ESPN's FPI, I think, actually does a pretty decent job of not being biased toward teams, toward brand names, which the AP and coaches poll and plenty of top 25s don't do a pretty good job at. So it's interesting to look at. And that's just some background noise. I want to jump in and start talking about it right from the get-go. And I also have something toward the end of the video, so make sure to stay around for that because that's very important. And you'll see. You'll see why that is. So please stick around. You won't regret it. Okay. ESPN's Football Power Index. What even is the Football Power Index? What's it designed to do? Well, the Football Power Index's job is to predict season outcomes. ESPN explicitly states that it is not a playoff predictor. It's not designed to rank teams 1 through 128 either. Though I think especially at the top of the list, ESPN's FPI sort of does this anyway by giving a Football Power Index score. A score that is especially, as I've already stated, more accurate at the top. The top teams in the elite category rarely change. And this year, that's Ohio State at 1, Alabama at 2, Georgia at 3. These were the top 3 teams in 2021 and in 2022 as well. And I think maybe in 2020. I know Alabama was 1 in 2020 and Ohio State was 2. I forget if Georgia was 3 or not. Oklahoma might have been 3 in 2020. But these 3 teams have been consistently in the top 3 of ESPN's FPI for quite some time. And a big part of that is due to recruiting, which ESPN's FPI heavily weighs recruiting. They love quarterback production, returning quarterback production, and recruiting. ESPN's FPI feasts off of that. And for a variety of good reasons, though sometimes it relies too much on those, as we've seen faults in ESPN's FPI, and we've seen faults in really any other power ranking system, which is what makes college football so good, is the unpredictability of it sometimes. But the Football Power Index score is basically a measurement of a team's true strength on a net point scale. That's exactly what ESPN says. Lots of jargon in there. Also known as expected point margin versus average opponent on the field. And I don't work for ESPN, so I don't know exactly what all that means, but I read that and I think you're basically saying who you think the best teams are in the country, top to bottom. You're just putting some fancy jargon with it, stamping a few numbers, a metric on it, and then adding predictions based off of strength of schedule, perceived strength of the team who has to play that schedule, and then playing that all out in what's the percentage chance of this team to do X, whether that's go bowling, win their division, win their conference, get to the playoff, win the national title, whatever it is. ESPN's FPI has prediction columns for all of that. Of course, they do explicitly state they're not a playoff predicting machine, and that makes sense because they only factor in the first 12 games. They only do that. And then once conference championship games are set, they then begin to factor those in. Once the final college football playoff rankings are set, they then factor those in, so on and so forth. So ESPN's FPI is also something that gradually changes throughout the year. They begin relying heavily on preseason metrics like returning starters and production, and then the efficiency metrics slowly take over as the season progresses. But that's just some background information. It is really interesting. I like checking ESPN FPI during the regular season, the actual season, and even the preseason almost daily. I use it as a very strong reference point because it's a computer algorithm that doesn't have a lot of bias to it, and there is tons of value, whether we like it or not, in recruiting, in returning starters, quarterback production, so on and so forth. But Ohio State's ranked at number 1. So to all of you people who say 9-3, 9-3, they're going to lose to Penn State, lose to Wisconsin, lose to Michigan, which I've stated in plenty of my videos, it's more likely that Ohio State goes 12-0 than 9-3. I actually think it's more likely Ohio State goes 15-0 than they do 9-4 or 10-3 if we add on bowl games and postseason games, so on and so forth. Well, ESPN's FPI agrees with me here. They have Ohio State at number 1, and Ohio State has 31.5 football power index points. And they're given by far the best odds to win the national title game with 36.7% odds. They're not going 9-3, according to me, or ESPN's FPI. Now, every given Saturday, there is a chance for a win or a loss for Team X, and Ohio State is included in there. But Ohio State, their reputation and talent at quarterback, their returning production, which is much higher compared to Georgia and Alabama, while they've recruited at a close to similar level, those are the reasons why Ohio State's at number 1. And their defense is getting better. So that's something I agree with right there. If you've watched this channel, you know that I'm very bullish on Michigan. I have Michigan as my number 1, both in my personal top 25 and in my own power rankings, which, if you didn't already figure it out, that's what I'm going to show at the end of this video, is my own power rankings and power index and comparing it to ESPN's. It's a fun little project that I've been working on over the past few months, so I want to preview the alpha or beta version of that to you all. But if you're not going to rank Michigan at number 1, rank Ohio State at number 1. So I actually do not mind Ohio State being at number 1 at all. And they're number 1 by quite a wide margin because Alabama's only given 28.2 football power index points. Georgia's only given 27.4. They're the 3rd highest ranked team. LSU's at 4 with 22.1 points, so they're significantly lower than the top 3. Texas is 5th with 21.9 points. Michigan is 6th with 21.4 points. That right there is a pick that I despise. I think Michigan should be top 4 in any power ranking system with the returning production they have. They have a great quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. They have a reputable coach and coaching staff in Jim Harbaugh and their staff. I understand Texas at number 5, though. I don't understand LSU at number 4. It's only going to be Brian Kelly's 2nd year. I know they're using the portal. I know they have a deep quarterback room, but they have questions at offensive line. And look, Brian Kelly, he's a great coach. I just don't know exactly if he has the it factor. And that's the same question with Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. I just look at LSU, outside of Harold Perkins at linebacker on defense, where's the unicorn? I know they have 4- and 5-star players, but it's year 2. They don't have great running backs, in my opinion. They don't have a great offensive line. They have an okay tight end room. And quarterback, they have questions to solve at quarterback, whether it's Jaden Daniels' capability to pass, whether it's the Nussmeier kid, Garrett Nussmeier. That's an interesting quarterback room there. It mainly has to do with the line of scrimmage for LSU. Matt House is going to coordinate a good defense. Harold Perkins is definitely a unicorn there, but I just don't think LSU is a top 4 team, top 5 team. Texas, on the other hand, I think has top 5 potential. With Malik Murphy, Quinn Ewers, and Archie Manning, that is potentially the best quarterback room in the country by raw talent. They have a wide receiver room that ranks pretty darn close to Ohio State's, an offensive line that is among the likes of Georgia and Michigan with raw talent, and they return all 5 players, and their defense last year was top 25, Gary Patterson being a huge part of that. And Gary Patterson and Steve Sarkisian, whether as head coaches or assistant coaches, have gone undefeated, and Steve Sarkisian has won a national title for Nick Saban. So I think Texas at 5, as much as I made fun of ESPN's FPI last year for having Texas in the top 10, I think it's justified this year. But Michigan, you got to put Michigan inside the top 5. USC's at 7. They have 19.9 points. Clemson at 8 with 19.4. Notre Dame at 9 with 18.4 points. I think that's pretty high. If they added Sam Hartman last year, I'd say definitely they're a top 10 team, but they only conveniently added a good quarterback when most of the supporting cast, including tight end Michael Mayer, Isaiah Foskey, and much of the defensive line, they left. So that's kind of a trade-off there. I don't expect Notre Dame to take much of a leap, if any leap at all. They'll probably get better at offense, but on defense, I'd expect an equal regression. And then finally, Penn State at 10 with 17.5 football power index points. So that's the top 10 of ESPN's FPI right there. We'll go through a little more of the list again toward the end of the video. But Ohio State at preseason number 1, and just some things to look at when it comes to the Big Ten and the SEC, who obviously dominate any power ranking index, whether it's ESPN's or anyone else's, myself included. Number 1, speaking of preseason number 1, Ohio State's talent, returning starters, and their quarterback room contributed heavily to their number 1 ranking. Very heavily. Returning quarterback production is taken extremely seriously by ESPN. In fact, on average, a returning starting quarterback is worth 3.3 points in a game. That's more than a field goal, so it's worth a whole lot. I don't know if it's worth that much in my personal opinion, but ESPN's FPI does have a reputation, so there is something to it for sure. And if you compare the quarterbacks and the quarterback rooms of the top 3 teams, which is, again, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State's quarterbacks have the most experience. Kyle McCord started a game in 2021 against Akron, and he played several games in 2022 in a backup role, and he saw some action in other 2021 games. He's seen more action, taken more snaps, and played in a better offense than Jalen Milroe or Carson Beck, who are currently the projected starters for Alabama and Georgia respectively. So Ohio State has the edge in the quarterback room, which again, ESPN's heavily biased toward. It doesn't matter that Georgia and Alabama have recruited better as a whole on defense, or even if we're being honest at the offensive line, ESPN cares deeply about skill positions, especially quarterback. And Ohio State has more experience, more returning production, and more talent at those areas compared to Alabama and Georgia. Plus, they have more returning production in general. Georgia and Alabama, last time I checked, were outside the top 100 in those. Ohio State, I think, is inside the top 50 in returning production. So where Georgia and Alabama are maybe slightly better when it comes to overall recruiting, and maybe even overall coaching, some would argue that Georgia and Alabama are just a tier ahead in development and in coaching, Ohio State more than makes up for that, according to ESPN, with better returning production, more starters, a veterancy to the team, especially at quarterback. All of that contributes to Ohio State's number 1 ranking, but the depth of the SEC is not undervalued because the rest of the top 4 teams, according to the FPI, are Alabama, Georgia, and LSU in that order. And as you can see on the screen, 4 more SEC teams are inside the top 20, and Texas and Oklahoma, who will be joining the conference next year, are inside of the top 15. More specifically, inside the top 12. Texas is at 5. Oklahoma's 11. Tennessee is 12th. Ole Miss is 16th. Florida's 18th. Texas A&M is 19th. Now, I have no clue how Florida's 18th. They have a good running back room, good offensive line, underrated defense, but Wisconsin had all of those things in 2019. Not 2019, 2021. And Graham Mertz wrecked them. And I don't think there's any coach outside of maybe the cornerbacks coach. I think Corey Raymond is his name at Florida. Very good secondary coach. I don't think there's a coach on that staff that's as good as Jim Leonhard was. So I look at Florida, and if they don't have a better quarterback than Graham Mertz or Jack Miller, I almost view it as impossible that they will be a top 25 team, let alone number 18. But anyway, the SEC is widely favored to once again capture the national title. The top 3 SEC teams are given a 43.6% chance to win the college football playoff. But what's interesting is you look at Ohio State, and by themselves, they almost have those same exact odds. Now, a lot of that's due to the fact that Ohio State has an easier strength of schedule projected than Alabama and LSU. So there's a greater likelihood that Alabama and LSU are knocked out of the playoff conversation compared to Ohio State. But even Georgia, who's recruited better than Ohio State, who's won the past 2 national titles, who's finally developed a reputation at the position that ESPN cares most about, the quarterback, Georgia only has, with an easier strength of schedule, a 19.1% chance to win the national title. That is almost half of Ohio State's projection to win the national title. So it's pretty darn clear that Ohio State themselves, according to Football Power Index, is Tier 1A, whereas Alabama and Georgia are Tier 1B, if we were to split the Tier 1s into different tiers themselves. Ohio State's given a 71.2% chance to win the Big Ten. The remainder of that goes to Michigan, who's pegged at number 6, and Penn State at number 10. However, when it comes to the Big Ten, do not overlook Wisconsin or Michigan State. Wisconsin and Michigan State being the 4th and 5th best teams according to FPI. Michigan State's 31st. Wisconsin is 20th. And ESPN actually penalizes teams who have a brand new head coach. So if Luke Fickell was tenured longer at Wisconsin, Wisconsin would probably be ranked higher. And they're more than favored to win their division. They're given a 47.9% chance to win the West. The next highest team to do that in the West is Iowa with a 20.1% chance to win. And Wisconsin also has a 1% chance to make the playoffs, which, hey, newsflash, that's more than TCU was given last year. So, looking at all these things, especially the Big Ten and the SEC, it's clear that talent, because again, you look at Ohio State, you look at Georgia, you look at Alabama, those are the teams that have recruited the best over the past half a decade. That's a big part of the reason why they're in the top 3. And the fact that all of them have had great quarterback play over the past few seasons, that's another reason. ESPN also takes into account past success, with last year being weighed the heaviest. And some would make an argument that those 3 teams were the best 3 teams in the nation last year. I think Michigan would have been up there, but FPI would disagree with me, and other pollsters would disagree with me. And that's okay. So here we are. That's ESPN's Football Power Index. There are some other rankings that I just want to go over really quickly. In the Pac-12, USC's 7th. They're ranked the highest. Oregon's at 13th. Utah's at 15th. Florida State's actually outside the top 10. I know a lot of you probably noticed that. They're only given 15 Football Power Index points. They're pegged at 14th, and they only have a 4% chance to make the playoffs. I know SG1 Sports has them inside of his top 4. A lot of people have Florida State inside of their top 10, if not their top 5. ESPN's Football Power Index is encouraging us to pump the brakes, and I almost hate to say it, but I agree with them, despite the fact that I do have Florida State ranked higher than 14th, both in my power rankings and in my own personal opinion rankings, which have more room for bias and require less research. It's a more reactive poll, whereas the power rankings, as we all know, power rankings are meant to be less reactive than just a standard top 25. TCU, after practically losing everybody, is still at 17th, which I guess sort of tells me that ESPN's FPI still has its drug-induced moments. I don't know. A Texas Tech's inside the top 25, along with Baylor, so that's interesting to follow. Washington's at 21. That's a team that a lot of people have inside their top 15, even top 10. I think their low ranking is due to the fact that Washington doesn't have a great reputation for recruiting, but I think Kalen DeBoer is more than a proven winner. He has a reputation at developing talent as well. North Carolina's at 25th. You have to go all the way down to find a group of 5 team that has any respect. You go down there, I think the highest ranked group of 5 team is SMU at 49th in the American. And then the next highest is Tulane in the American. They're 55th. So those are just some more rankings. I'll have ESPN's FPI link down below, but you can also just search it up on the web. It'll pretty much pop up instantaneously. Now, I want to get into my own personal power index, which I call the potential power index. So on the left-hand side, you have ESPN's Football Power Index Top 12. On the right-hand side, you have college football with Sam's Potential Power Index. And a lot of the teams appear. Like a lot of the teams that appear are in both lists. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, those are 3 Big Ten teams that appear inside the top 10 here. Georgia, Alabama, LSU, those are 3 SEC teams that are inside the top 10. Texas is also there. So you, right out of the gate, you have 7 teams that are shared with my potential power index and ESPN's potential power index top 10. 7 teams. So I do respect ESPN's FPI. I actually look at, as I've already said, I check it almost daily during the regular season and even at times during the preseason. It's a valuable resource. But as someone who's obsessed with football as I am and curious, I do want to see if I can design something, not that at the current moment can necessarily beat ESPN's FPI, but that maybe can complement it well and strike some areas where I think it's weakest in. Number 1, both ESPN's FPI and my potential power index are designed to predict games and consequentially the best teams in the nation. ESPN's FPI would say they're not trying to predict the best teams in the nation. I don't even bother with trying to jump through all those mental gymnastics. My PPI also tries to do that. The Football Power Index leans more toward high school recruiting to indicate talent, whereas the Potential Power Index leans more toward development. I still follow the blue chip ratio and believe in it. You have to either be very close to having a blue chip ratio or have a blue chip ratio to win the national title, which is actually one of the bigger reasons why Florida State isn't inside of my top 10. But as heavy and as true as the blue chip ratio is, I think sometimes ESPN's FPI can get too deep into that. And they look at high school stars and those matter, But if you're like what Texas was for the past not 2 seasons, but the past several years, decade or more, they could not develop the 4 and 5 stars they were getting for the life of them. And therefore, it was meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. If you can't develop, then you're never going to be able to extract the potential that those 5-star players have, which means their potential is irrelevant. Potential includes both raw talent, but also the ability of a coaching staff to develop that raw talent, whether at a 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star level. And part of the reason Michigan's at number 1 is because their staff is one of the best at developing lower-end 3-star, 4-star players to play like 4 stars and 5 stars. They don't recruit at that level, and I think because they don't recruit at that level, it'll be hard for them to have the same consistent success as Ohio State, Georgia, or Alabama. But combining their ability to develop with the fact that they're top 5 nationally in returning production, and they've had quite the 2-year run, and they're ridiculously efficient, all of those things tell me, and I put it into my own little algorithm that I myself have and am working on, and boom, Michigan's right up there with Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. Not as a program, not from a recruiting standpoint, but for this year. This year, their returning production makes up for what they lack in recruiting high school talent, because development and returning production in veterancy matter that much. The football power index is heavily biased toward quarterback production. However, the potential power index, while emphasizing quarterback importance, it doesn't zone in on just one player. It doesn't. It really doesn't zone in on one player. Part of the reason Texas, in my opinion, has a really good quarterback room isn't because of Quinn Ewers. It's because watching Malik Murphy from Texas's spring game, I think if Quinn Ewers was just, let's say he transferred to a different school, well, my opinion on Texas, ESPN's FPI would fluctuate on Texas if that happened. Texas would probably stay right there because they have depth. It isn't just about one player, and it isn't just about the quarterback room, because you got to factor in defense. Like, it's statistically been proven that it's hard to replace defensive back secondary talent. So it weighs quarterback the heaviest out of all positions, but it doesn't weigh them significantly heavier than it would, let's say, offensive line, wide receiver, defensive line, linebacker, defensive back, tight end, or special teams. Probably, just because those positions are smaller and have less of an impact. But those positions even are still weighed because they still have an impact. And all that being said, this is a critique, but it's also me wanting to invent something and test something that's complementary to ESPN's football power index. So the potential power index is a tool that I am working on, and I encourage you to engage with me on it. I'm going to make engaging content and videos based off of the potential power index, and I'm going to try and turn it into something, and something that is workable, something that I can eventually present to you all, whether it's on a website, whether it's through something else, who knows? But it's enjoyable, and I think that there are some areas where ESPN's FPI can improve. And I think that I have an idea, or at least a grasp as to what those could be. So that's the comparison between the two, but they really are designed to a big degree to do something similar, and they're designed to be complementary. I'm not developing my potential power index with the intention of it being better and replacing ESPN's football power index. I don't have the resources that ESPN has. So, at least for now. But that's all I have to say in this video, reviewing ESPN's football power index and talking a little bit about my potential power index. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye-bye.